one last thing that I wanted to touch upon on the question of marriage, and I suppose, again, trying to give the devil his due, a lot, I've heard that many times, that we humans, we are just not made to be monogamous, and that even birds, who are another species that are largely monogamous, tend to stray, and that monogamy as sort of an institution is just somehow goes against our nature. What have you got to say about that?
All bunk, all Huey. No, I'm glad you brought up birds, because for a long time, scientists used to think birds were 100% strictly monogamous, and it wasn't until they were able to check DNA that they realized, oh my, birds actually do get out a lot. And so yeah, I mean, birds actually are doing monogamous, but there is a lot of cheating that goes on among birds. The good news on that front is that humans are actually cheat a lot less than birds do. It depends on the culture involved, but for most cultures, the rate of cuckoldry among children is just a lot lower. Like we're talking like 2-3%, compared to as high as like 30% among some bird species. So and that's because of culture. So there's a number of ways in which human culture has affected our very anatomy. And the example I look to use, because I don't think it's political at all, most people kind of instantly grasp this, is cooking. Is that everyone understands that cooking is culture. No human is born knowing how to cook. But our intestines are so much smaller than other species like us, like apes, etc. And that's all because of we've had cooking culture for so long that the digestion that takes place that used to take place in the body now take place out of the body in cooking. And so that is one way in which culture has changed our very DNA, our very physiology. And the same is true of monogamy. Monogamy, as I discussed in the very first chapter, in the very earliest chapter, is the reason why we are different than the apes, is the reason why we have cultural learning, is the reason why we are so smart, is the reason why we're able to adapt and conquer all 7 continents. And it is because we form these long-term pair bonds. It's because both the cultural norms within hunter-gatherer societies and then our own genes, specifically the chemicals within our body, vasopressin specifically, that binds us to our sexual partners, that then makes us more likely to form these strong emotional bonds. Now, are there some desires within us that we're physiologically bound to that force us beyond monogamy? Sure, there is, men want to dominate, and they want to have as many sexual partners as possible. But that's also true of other things that we see that out of the context of a hunter-gatherer society can get out of hand. Just look at obesity and our desire for sugar, right? So, in hunter-gatherer said that, hunger we have for sugar is satiated by the fact that we're constantly moving, and, we're don't have enough. We're not sedentary, and so we're moving a lot more. And there's just not enough we're not getting enough sugar to that we become fat. And we're moving way too much, so that when we do, we at least burn it off. And the same is true actually of monogamy, in that as I detail in the book, pretty much all hunter-gatherer tribes that are nomadic that have ever been encountered were monogamous. It wasn't until we became sedentary, it wasn't until we had agriculture, that you started to see polygamy start happening. That system worked for a long time. Pretty much every empire you can think of in the past was polygamous. And I kind of take a world tour through the book.
Yeah.
You can look at China, Japan, India, of course, Mali and Africa. But even in Europe, the Vikings were famously polygamous. And that was a successful mating strategy for a long time. But then you had Christianity come along through, kind of both Greek and Roman society. And that's where it started. It evolved like anything else. But then with Christianity, you had a full-on commitment to monogamy. And it was a cultural form that ended up catching on. And as I describe in the book, by breaking down patriarchal clan structures through that marriage family program I talked about earlier, that
Mm-hmm.
created the building blocks for civil society through guilds and universities. And then that allowed for both democracy and the Industrial Revolution to came along. And because monogamous marriage so successfully channels our sexual desires into what I call long-term projects of cooperative care, where men and women come together to help their children, but also the grandparents are then able to come in. Only because of monogamy can grandparents identify who their grandchildren are and then help. So through these long-term projects of cooperative care, you have a lot more cooperation helping between individuals. And that's really why the West won. That is why you had the West go on and conquer the rest of the world. And so then in the 1700s, 1800s, you have countries recognize this. They say, look, monogamy does seem to be the better instance. And so between, I think it was like 1850 and 1910, you had India, China, Russia, all these countries that had never outlawed polygamy before all began to outlaw polygamy and moved, straight into monogamy. So it didn't happen everywhere. You
Mm-hmm.
still have about 25% of the world, population-wise, lives in countries where polygamy is either predominantly practiced or is outright legal. But 75% of the world lives in monogamous cultures where monogamy is enforced through law. And that's rare in human history. That was just not true for the past 10,000 years up until, Christianity started spreading.
Mm. But I think as well there is something just inherently, despite a lot of these like really progressive or feminists claiming that open relationships and all that is for the benefit of women. When you look at the places where polygamy is still practiced today, they're certainly not the type of countries where women have got the most freedoms, rights, or choices, I suppose. So
Right.
it's a
Right.
there's a bit of the there is a bit of reconciliation there that I think needs to be happening between the feminist movement and perhaps a little bit more of the nod to the tradition and recognition that it's not just patriarchy, that it's not. I think we've just got that tendency to really disqualify tradition as useless and remove it without really understanding just how much we rely on these traditions
Yeah. I
in
mean,
our current
the,
societies.
the argument I would make would be that monogamous marriage is a huge force against patriarchal families, and that when we speak of the patriarchy, what we're talking about is powerful men dominating everyone else, and the counter to that is the nuclear family, where you have men and women in partnerships together that kind of form their own lives and are able to decide what they want to do with their lives. And when the church was first forming, Christianity was hugely popular, mostly among women. And it was because that the church afforded so many opportunities for women, both in the leadership, but as equal partners spiritually within the church, that it spread. And so much of Christianity spread through women and through marriage. Constantine, the Roman emperor that legalized Christianity, he didn't make it as some people, he didn't make Christianity the state religion of Rome. That came later, but he did legalize it. But he was introduced to Christianity from his mother. His father was pagan, but his mother was Christian. That's how he learned about the religion. The Carolingian dynasty, that was also, you had pagan men marrying Catholic women who didn't convert them immediately, but eventually did. So you have the Carolingian Empire was spread and passed that way. But again, it was often through women that the church spread. And so I think feminists today have just lost touch with the reality that the best way to counteract true patriarchal power, true patriarchal culture, is through reciprocal monogamous marriage.